stand together. Welcome if you're joining us in person or online. We are so happy to be with you today. Let's pray. before we can move in here. God, we welcome you. We need you here. We've come to meet with you. We've come to glorify you. We've come to worship you. Would you focus our hearts and our eyes and our minds on you, on your beauty today? No matter where we're at, no matter how we've come, no matter what our home looked like before we left, we focus on you today. In this moment, God, would you bring about a sweet presence in this moment? We love you and we are excited to worship you today. In your son's name, amen. Amen. Come on, he picked up all my pieces, pulled is how I fight my battles. Come on. This is how I fight my battles. Yeah. This is how I fight my battles. Oh, I fight my battles with you. It may look, come on. It may look like I'm surrounded and I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded and I'm surrounded by you. Yeah, it may look like I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded and I'm surrounded. You go before, behind, beside me. Always there to hold me, always there to guide me. We look to you, Lord. We look to you, Lord. Sing when I thought I lost, you knew where I left me. You reintroduced me to your love. You picked up all the pieces, put me back together. You already
Jesus, thank you for this morning. Thank you for a time of worship. We're just excited to hear from your word today. I pray that you just bless us while we hear from Josh. Pray this in your name. Amen. Hey, good morning, OneHope. How's it going? Good, great. It's really bright up here. I can't see much, but you guys all look happy, I think. So, hey, my name's Andy. I'm the family pastor here at OneHope, and we're super excited you guys are here. A couple announcements before we get started. First off, if you are new, we are super excited you're here. You can come up and get a hug from me right now. I'm just kidding. That'd be really weird. I would never do that to anybody ever. But no, if you're new, we're super excited you're here. Go ahead, and if you want to, in the front, there's a little card that you can fill out and just let us know that you're here. We'd love to get coffee with you or text you, email you, and just get to know more about you. And that's it, no hugs. Unless you want hugs, but I'm not doing that. So go ahead and fill that out, and you can put that in one of the boxes in the back. If you consider yourself a member at OneHope, you can go ahead and tithe, and you can do that in the boxes back door. You can do that online. And also, we do have something coming up, another grill and chill. Who was at the grill and chill last time? It was really hot, but it was really fun. But it wasn't like hot, like that's cool hot. It was like temperature hot. It was like super hot out. So I think we're going to try to get some shade covering action going. But we're going to have a lot of good food, and that's going to be right after church on July 11th. And then that night at 6 o'clock, we're going to have a worship night here. So yeah, it's going to be really fun. So we hope to see you guys there. Other than that, Josh, well, actually, I'm sorry. For the Grill and Chill, we do need volunteers. And if you want to help out, we need people to help set up, tear down, hang out, and you get to do that with me, which is like a gift, right? So go ahead, and you guys can do that on your way out. There will be sign-ups on the back. Other than that, Josh?
Thanks, buddy. Go ahead. You are a gift. Did you know that? You guys can have a seat. I know that Andy forgot about that, but it's okay. It's okay. Sorry, buddy. Hey, like you said, my name is Josh. I'm the teaching pastor here. We're going to be in the book of Judges today. We're going to jump right in. And so I want you to turn in your Bibles to Judges chapter 9. Judges chapter 9. If you're new with us, we've been in this series from the book of Judges. And what you got to know to kind of understand what's going on is that in the book of Judges, everything is broken and everybody is bad. Even the good guys end up doing such awful things that you might as well classify them as bad guys. And I know that that doesn't sound very hopeful, and it doesn't sound very positive and encouraging. It's definitely not. Judges wouldn't make its way onto K-Love, I know. But there is some nuggets of truth here. There's some wisdom to be gleaned from this book. And you got to know this, that book is written in a depressing manner on purpose. And the reason is the author of Judges is trying to use a microscope or maybe a magnifying glass, and he's trying to hold that up to the world. And the whole idea of the book of Judges is that brokenness doesn't just exist in the time of Judges, it also exists in our world. And as we don't ignore that, as we don't dismiss that, as we really take a cold, hard look at how bad things can get sometimes, what happens is our hearts become unattached to this world. And so part of what the book of Judges is trying to do is to say, hey, this world is not your home. And if you look at the brokenness in this world and you feel like, man, I don't know if I want to be here forever, that's good news. You're supposed to feel that way. In fact, the book of Judges, it ends by hammering home this point that in those days, Israel didn't have a king, a good king, somebody that would come and right all of the wrongs, fix all of the brokenness. And so the book of Judges is very much about seeing how broken and messed up things can get sometimes, so that we can disattach our hearts from this world and begin to long for the person, the king, who is going to come back and fix all of those problems. And what we believe in Christianity is that Jesus is coming back one day, and when he does, the Bible says that he will set free all of the captives. He'll bind up all of the wounds, and he'll dry every tear. Sin, death, evil, wickedness, injustice, all of that will be washed away in his righteous reign and rule. And so as we see the brokenness in Judges, know this, that serves to help us long for that day, long for the king. That's the main theme of the book of Judges. Now, I gotta tell you this, the story that we're gonna be in today is not a Sunday school story. I never heard it in Sunday school. I've never heard a pastor preach on this part of Judges. I took a class on Judges, and we skipped a story. Guess which one we skipped? This one. Here's the truth. This story is often overlooked, and the reason for that is because it's pretty dark. There is no hero. Nobody wins. It's hard to pull out like a moral lesson from this story. It's hard to look at this story and glean some wisdom because it's not fun. It's not positive and encouraging. It's not. But here's what I believe. I want to invite you to believe this with me this morning as we look at this story. I believe what David says in Psalm 19, that the word of the Lord is to be more highly valued, more treasured than pure gold. What David is saying is, I would rather have God's words than all of my treasury. I would rather have this scripture than all of the money in the world. David says that there is value in the word of the Lord. And so as we look at this story, I want to ask you to believe this with me this morning, that there is value here, that we'll glean something valuable that will add to your life and will help you worship God more. I really believe that. Do you believe that with me this morning? Amen. Let's jump into it. We're going to be in Judges chapter 9. And actually, I want to give you a little bit of this backstory. This story actually kind of starts with a woman, a young woman, and she is likely between the ages of 13 and 17. We also know from the little details that we have of her that she's likely born into poverty. And we think that because she ends up at this young age becoming a concubine. If you don't know what a concubine is, it's basically a social contract that they had back then, that a wealthier man could have access to this woman to sleep with her and have exclusive rights to do that if he could take care of her and sometimes her extended family. And we can assume that she was born into poverty from that fact because wealthy women were married to wealthy men, and middle class, if there was a middle class back then, they were trying to climb that social ladder, and so this woman doesn't seem, at least, to have those options, and so we can assume that she was probably born into poverty. She ends up having a son with this man, and then she completely disappears. We don't know if she died. It's probably likely that she died early in her son's life. We don't know when exactly. We do know that women died in childbirth at alarming rates back then, and so it's likely that maybe she passed away in childbirth. But it's also true that people died for all sorts of things back then, and so we don't know when exactly she passed away, but it seems like she's completely erased from this story. And so what likely would have happened is that her son was raised by her parents or her aunts and uncles, but because he's the son of a concubine, he doesn't have legal rights to his father. In fact, his father would have actively sought to distance himself from this son because his father has legitimate sons that he needs to invest his time, invest his wealth, invest his legacy in, and they're the important ones, and this son is not the important one. And before his mother passes away, she gives him, I think, a name that she's trying to do the best thing, but I think this name is actually kind of cruel in the grand scheme of things. She names him Abimelech. Abimelech is Hebrew for my dad is king. That's what it means. My dad is king. And it's kind of a hint to who his father is. His father actually is not really a king. He's not listed in the kings of Israel, but he's the closest thing that Israel had to a king at this point. He's one of the judges. His name is Gideon. And as Abimelech grows up, whether he's with his aunts or uncles, cousins, or with his mother's parents, he likely grows up with these stories being told to him about the king that he's named after, the dad, and his exploits, because this is all fresh in Israel's history. You remember last week we talked about how Gideon delivered Israel from the Midianites, and God used Gideon in a very powerful and mighty way. And Gideon's fame and fortune really, really increased. He was a very popular guy back in this day. And so Abimelech grows up knowing that that's his dad who doesn't want him. And it's almost ironic that every single time somebody calls his name, he's reminded of this fact that he's the illegitimate, unwanted child of the king who doesn't care. And that is Abimelech's story. You might guess what, we can probably make some guesses as to what his childhood was like, playing with the kids on the street. Hey, my dad is the king. And guess what? My dad is the king. Oh, well, if your dad's the king, how come we've never seen him here? How come you're still poor? It's likely that he went into his teenage years and had the common teenage angst and thought, why doesn't my dad love me? Well, if he's the king and he's so wealthy, couldn't he just send some extra cash here? Like, couldn't he just get me an extra pair of clothes? Couldn't this guy, help me out? It was famous in this day that Gideon had 70 sons, and Abimelech is never listed among them. And so his whole life is based upon what Abimelech misses, what he lacks. It's based on this scarcity and insecurity that comes from this father who is a king-sized hole that he has in his heart. And as you may guess, a person who grows up with this reality, who can't escape it because of his name, who can't escape this reality, his heart becomes hard and cold, and he becomes a vengeful and violent man. And that's the beginning. Who's excited? The next part of the story starts in Judges chapter 9, verse 1. If we have your Bibles, you can pull that up. You can also follow along on the screen behind me. It says this: one day, Gideon's son Abimelech went to Shechem to visit his uncles, his mother's brothers. Definitely not his father's brothers. They would have disowned him. He said to them and to the rest of his mother's family, ask the leading citizens of Shechem. Shechem is the town that his mother was from. It's the town that his mother's family lives in. It's a very wealthy and influential town, actually. We'll see later that they have some architecture in this town that kind of signals that they had a lot of wealth in this town. They're likely influential. So he says, so he goes to his mother's family and he says, ask the leading citizens of Shechem whether they want to be ruled by all 70 of Gideon's sons. Gideon at this point has passed away, and it seems like the political situation was that Gideon left the rule of Israel to 70 people. That's a recipe for disaster. You've heard the phrase, too many cooks in a kitchen, right? This is too many kings in a castle. See what I did there? That was on the fly, too. Oh, man, that was good. Okay, anyway. He says, ask them if they want all 70 of Gideon's sons to rule over you or just one man, and remember that I am your own flesh and blood. So Abimelech's uncles gave his message to the citizens of Shechem on his behalf, and after listening to this proposal, the people of Shechem decided in favor of Abimelech because he was their relative. They gave him 70. Remember that number? How many sons did Gideon have? They gave him 70 silver coins from the temple of Baal-Berit. There's something really fascinating about the renaming of Baal in this passage. I don't have time to tell it to you. If you're really curious later, email me. But basically, Baal is this other god, this false god, this idol that Israel often left worshiping Yahweh to go and worship Baal and his wife Asherah in the Canaanite mythology. Baal is one of the gods, and he has a wife Asherah. So these leading citizens, they take some money from the temple of Baal, and this linkage here, the author is intentionally telling you where the money came from, because you're supposed to see that this whole action, this decision of Abimelech, is really based in some really sinful and dark stuff. It comes from the temple of a false god. They gave him 70 silver coins from the temple of Baal-Berit, which he used to hire some reckless troublemakers. I love how the NLT says reckless troublemakers. It's making it seem real nice. In the Hebrew, it means empty, Not just reckless, but empty and reckless. That's how the Hebrew is situated. Empty and reckless people who agreed to follow him. Now catch this, verse 5. He went to his father's home in Ophrah. It's famous that Gideon had an estate in Ophrah. You might remember that the angel of the Lord comes and calls Gideon to be a judge, and Gideon in his home in Ophrah tears down an altar of Baal in Ophrah. We know later that Gideon became very, very wealthy. People, I don't know if it was a tax situation or maybe it was the spoils of war, but Gideon became very wealthy. And so his estate is likely pretty lavish. There's some vineyards you can maybe imagine. There are rolling fields where the family is very well provided for from the fruit of all these fields. There's likely a ton of livestock. Gideon is famous for having 70 sons, and you don't do that with one woman. You do that with multiple wives. And so there's likely multiple houses on this estate for all of this stuff. And so Abimelech raises this private army and steps into Ophrah, his father, who didn't care about him, who he is unwanted by, who's the king who doesn't care. He steps on his father's estate, probably for the first time. What do you think is going through Abimelech's head? He sees all of this stuff that he never had. All of this stuff that he probably feels entitled to. And it's my guess that out of this father hole in his heart comes all sorts of hatred and anger. He's already a vengeful man. We know that because he's already plotting to overthrow his father's legacy. But when he comes here, I think he just sees red. That's all he sees. And it says that he came to his father's estate in Ophrah, and there on one stone they killed all 70 of his half-brothers, the sons of Gideon. Verse 6 says, Then all the leading citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo called a meeting under the oak beside the pillar. What's kind of interesting is whenever you see the Old Testament refer to the oak or this type of tree, this famous tree, it was thought in Canaanite mythology that these big trees were symbols of Asherah, and so that's Baal's wife, and you would often erect a statue of Baal. You wouldn't necessarily carve features like a face or anything, it would just be a pillar of Baal. And so that's what's going on here. They meet at this site of worship, and they at the site of worship of the false gods, they make Abimelech their king. In one fell swoop, Abimelech gets everything that he wants. He kills all of his half siblings, destroys his father's legacy, steals Shechem away from this jewel of a town, from the rule of his father, and he himself is crowned king. That's how this story goes. Anybody having fun yet? There are actually, I believe, multiple things that we could focus on from the life of Abimelech that would be valuable for us. For the sake of time, I only want to focus us on one. It's the big idea that we're going to be talking about today. This is the thing that I hope you take away from this message, and the thing that I hope you take away from this story. Even though there's lots of things that we could take away from this story, let's just focus on this one. It's this: decisions reveal desires. If you're a note taker, write that down. If you're not a note taker, write that down. Big idea is decisions reveal desires. Did you know that you make decisions? I know that sounds kind of silly because you probably do know that you make decisions. But as humans, we're often unaware of how many decisions we're making on a minute-by-minute basis. You make a lot of decisions. In fact, part of what it means to be a human being is to be responsible for choices and decisions that you make. So this morning, an alarm went off, and how many of you made a decision to ignore it? Anybody? Oh, good. Some honest people. Fantastic. Some of you made a decision to ignore the alarm. Some of you made a decision to get up, but you made a decision. Then you went and took a shower. We certainly hope you took a shower, but if you didn't, we feel relatable to you. Who's got time for that anymore? Right, so you went and you made a decision to get ready. You made a decision of what you wanted to wear to church this morning. You made a decision on what route to take to get to church. When you got in the car, you turned on something. You made a decision to listen to a podcast or some music. Maybe you got bored and you made another decision to turn something else on. When you got here, you decided what parking spot to sit in. Then you decided the route to take through the parking lot to get to the door. Then you decided what seat to sit in, and you decided who to sit by. You made a lot of decisions this morning. My whole point in this is we're sometimes unaware of just how many decisions that we make. Now, I want to put this to you, that our decisions very often reveal the desires of our hearts. Our decisions very often reveal the desires of our hearts. As humans, we most of the time make decisions based on what we want, what I want. And I know sometimes that's like weird to think about because you've probably been in this situation where you can decide that you should pay for a salad or dessert. And you think to yourself, well, I want the dessert, right? But I'm going to force myself to eat the salad. And sometimes we're like, man, that's not what I wanted. I made a decision not based on what I wanted, but what I want to push back to you on is that you actually did make a decision based on your desire. You chose to feel healthy instead of eating a dessert. And you, in that moment, if you ate a salad instead of a brownie, which I think you're maybe slightly crazy, but it's okay. If you made that decision, you decided to feel healthy or to make a healthy choice because you value that over the comfort of eating that chocolate brownie. You really make decisions based on what you want. And this is hard for us to realize because as humans, when we make bad decisions, our favorite game to play is the blame game, right? And let's be honest, we've all been there. That's a fun game to play. Anybody like, oh man, blame game, love that. It's also a really lonely game to play. The better you are at the blame game, the less people you'll find in your life. It's also really unhealthy. Because if you can't look realistically at your decisions and the desires that those decisions reveal, if you can't realistically look at those, then you'll never change and you'll never grow. If your bad decisions and your mistakes are always somebody else's fault, then guess what? You will never grow as a Christian and as a human. The better you are at the blame game, the more stuck you're going to be in your life. And so we don't really like this idea that our decisions really come from our desires, but it's true. In Abimelech's life, what do his decisions reveal about his desires? I think on the surface, that one's really easy, right? Abimelech wanted to be king. And so he makes this decision to send his uncles to do this political move to pull Shechem away from Gideon and his sons who are now ruling. And so he takes Shechem away from them. He makes the decision to go and murder all of his half-brothers, and then they crown him king. It's pretty obvious that what he wanted was to be crowned king. But I think if you dig a little deeper, you might realize that there's some other stuff in there. He's got deeper desires than just becoming king. If he wanted to just become king, he didn't have to murder all of his brothers. He could have just been the king of Shechem, right? But that wouldn't have made him happy. That's not what he really, really wanted. What Abimelech really, really wanted was revenge, to get back on his father for not wanting him all of those years, to take away his father's legacy, completely wipe it out. And so if you just dig a little bit, if you just go a little deeper in your decisions, what you'll find very often, if you're like me, is desires that you're not so proud of. That's very true for Abimelech, but I want to put this to you this morning that it's also true of us. I think when we're reading Bible stories and we come up against a really terrible character, it's really easy to think, yeah, that guy stinks. You know who he reminds me of? Person sitting next to me. He reminds me of my friend that I had once. He reminds me of my boss. Who he reminds me of? Fill in the blank, right? But here's the truth. Very often, the characters in the Bible that we are most uncomfortable with make us most uncomfortable because they remind us of ourselves. So, here's what I want to ask you this morning. What decisions did you make this week? You made a lot of them. We covered a bunch this morning. What decisions did you make this week? And what were the desires that informed those decisions? One of the best questions to ask yourself if you want to grow as a Christian or grow as a leader or grow as a whatever your career is, or grow as a parent or grow as a spouse. One of the best questions you can ask yourself is, why am I doing what I'm doing? What is the motive for me acting this way? And when you ask that question and you dig a little bit deeper, what you'll find is something that might be uncomfortable, but at least now you know it and you can begin to deal with it. Because here's the truth. You might not have hired 70 guys to come and kill all 70 of your half-brothers, but maybe this week you cut somebody down with your words. Maybe this week you got in an argument with your spouse or your kids or your parents and you said something that was, straight to the point. Why'd you do that? You might not have used the money that you got from Shechem to hire a bunch of thugs, but maybe you spent your money this week on something that maybe didn't lead to healing. Maybe you spent your money on something that led to you waking up the next day thinking, why did I do that? led to guilt and regret. Why? What was the desire behind that decision? Maybe you didn't make good friends with some pretty terrible people, some empty and worthless fellows, but maybe you do have friends that you kind of know you shouldn't be friends with because they have a bad influence on you. Maybe you have that. Why? Why? What's the desire behind that decision? I think when you know that, you can begin to make healthier choices. You can begin to make choices that look more like Jesus and less like Abimelech. But I want to give you a little bit of a warning. If you continue to make choices like Abimelech, it's not going to work out for you. It's not going to do that. This is what happens next to Abimelech, okay? This is from verse 22. It says this, after Abimelech ruled over Israel for 3 years, God sent a spirit that stirred up trouble between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem, and they revolted. All Abimelech wanted was to be king, and now his crown jewel, the city that made him king, is revolting against him. How do you think a violent and vicious man responds to that? Not good, not good. I love the author of Judges. He makes a comment here. He says, God was punishing Abimelech for murdering the 70 sons and the citizens of Shechem for supporting him in his treachery of murdering his brothers. One quick point that I want you to see is when you make bad decisions, sometimes God lets you know. And I'm just going to tell you, God always lets you know softly at first, and if you don't listen, and you don't listen, and you don't listen, and you don't listen, it's going to get worse. And he's trying to save you from that one, so listen to him early. Don't be Abimelech. Don't be that guy. Listen to him early. But I want you to see this, that Abimelech makes this decision out of this king father-sized hole that he has to seize control of Shechem, to wipe away his father's legacy, and he thinks he's arrived, but he hasn't. In fact, it only causes more trouble. He thinks he'll get security if he's the king. He gets less. He thinks he'll have more. He won't live out of a sense of scarcity anymore. He actually has less. And actually, at the end of the story, what happens is that he goes against Shechem. He leads his guys against all the forces of Shechem. He defeats them and kills all the people in Shechem. And the leading citizens, they go take refuge in the temple of Baal-Berit. But Baal-Berit is a false god. He's not real, and he can't save them. And Abimelech lights the building on fire. But Abimelech then has a problem. The city that made him king, the source of his power, he just destroyed it, as destructive people often do, destroy the most vital things in their lives. So now he's got to have another city. So he goes to actually a neighboring town, tries to do the same thing, and as he's setting fire to the building that everybody's taking refuge in, a woman on the roof takes a rock and throws it at him. You'll never use the phrase throws like a girl again after this, okay? She throws it at him, it hits him in the skull, and it says, hold on, we got to read the passage because it's even better than I'm going to say it. Can we throw that one up there real quick? Hold on. It's 53, I believe. Yep, 53. A woman on the roof dropped a millstone. Oh, so that's not a little rock. That's a big rock. She dropped a millstone, and it landed on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Thank you, Bible. Okay, so here's the truth. He's sitting there. He's about to die, and my favorite part of this story, it's a little bit of irony and poetic justice. He says, hey, guys, buddies, will you kill me so that it's not known that a woman killed me? And they're like, sure, and then they kill him, but I got news for you, Abimelech. We know. Whoops. I want you to see this, that Abimelech has these desires in his heart that cause him to make these unhealthy decisions, and he thinks that if he can just make these decisions the right way, then he'll feel secure. He'll feel like he has abundance in his life instead of scarcity. He'll feel like that daddy king hole is filled in his heart, but it leads to his death. He actually does not get what he wants. And so often with the desires of our hearts, we make the same mistake. We think that if we can change our circumstances, then we'll feel secure. Sometimes we approach the deeper desires that we have in this way. If I can just move out of this town, if I can just get a new job, if I can just get a new spouse, if I could just get a whole new batch of kids, right? If I could just go to a different church, if I could just get a new set of friends, then my whole life would be different. And here's the truth. Sometimes changing your circumstances can have a big impact on your life. But if you're using that choice to hide and shield yourself from actually having to change deep within, you're only going to recreate and recycle those same problems over and over. It'll be a new city, same problems, new friend group, same problems, new spouse maybe, same problems. If you refuse like Abimelech to do the deep inner work, You'll just keep repeating the same mistakes, making the same decisions over and over and over. And I want you to know this. As Christians, you know something that Abimelech doesn't know. You know that some of those deepest desires can only be filled in the presence of God. Can only be filled in the presence of God. Sometimes we think if we just had more money, then our lives would be different. Listen, your life would be different if you spent more time with Jesus. I believe it. Sometimes we think that our lives would be different if we could just get a different job with different responsibilities. It'd be less stress and I'd feel a lot better. No, listen, your life will change if you can just increase the amount of passion in your heart for the God of the universe. Your life could be so much different if you would love Jesus more. I'm not saying that we shouldn't change our circumstances ever. I'm not saying that we shouldn't ever we shouldn't ever try to change what's going on in our lives. But what I am saying is instead of trying that over and over and getting the same results over and over, why don't you try this? Standing in the presence of God and just worshiping him. Because I think when you do that, that will change everything. I'm going to bring the band back up, and as they do, I want to share this point. It's kind of interesting that, I was thinking about Abimelech this week, and I was kind of feeling sorry for him. I was like, oh, poor Abimelech. This guy, you could, from the truths about his childhood, you can almost predict the ending of his life, right? Like if you know this is how humans react under these difficult circumstances, you can almost see the trajectory of where his life is going. And I was kind of feeling bad for him this week. I was like, man, poor Abimelech. And I was thinking about how there's probably other characters and there's probably other people who feel a little bit like Abimelech, that you have parents who maybe didn't love you, who weren't there for you. You feel unwanted. Maybe you have you grew up in a situation in which you had a lot of scarcity and insecurity, and because of that, you just have like this anxiety and this maybe guilt and shame, and you have this scarcity mindset. But here's the truth: Abimelech and Jesus have so many similarities. There's this story in John 8 where Jesus is talking to all of his enemies and the Pharisees, and they're all like, they say this thing, yeah, where's your dad? And they bring it up because they think that they've got him with that one. That's the zinger that's going to shut him down. Because they believe that his mom had an extramarital affair, and that's why Jesus is here. So they're saying, yeah, Jesus, just like Abimelech, you don't have a dad that loves you. But in this moment, Jesus responds with something so brilliant. He basically says, I'm going to paraphrase, he says, I know my Father. I know my Father. I know my Father. And probably one of the best comebacks in the whole Bible, Jesus tells them that their father's the devil. Anyway. Oh, get him, Jesus. Anyway. Here's my point. If you feel like you were born into a rough situation, or maybe you didn't have to be born to it, maybe you're just in a rough one now, I want you to know you got a friend. His name's Jesus. I know that's like churchy and cheesy, but it's true. He knows. He knows. And Jesus was secure enough, and knew his Father enough, spent more time with his Father enough to know that when those things came up in his life that we would all be super triggered by, in those moments, Jesus said, I know who my Father is. And if you're like, man, how do I get that sense? I know who my Father is. How do I get to that place of security? Here's what I would say. The greatest tool that you have in your life to get more security is worship. It's worship. We're about to sing a song about all the things that Jesus is to us. Use this song to preach truth to your heart, that he is so much more than you could ever dream or imagine, and your deepest desires are in there to be fulfilled by him. We're going to stand and worship. Will you stand with us?
We hope to see you in person very soon. In the meantime, we have a one-stop shop for you to find all the links that you need. Go to onehopetoledo.com/info. There you can find out how to live, give, and serve. We would love to have you be part of our family, our community here at One Hope by doing life with us. You can do that by getting involved in our online Bible studies and our community life groups. You can also give at that link. If you give to OneHope, we are so thankful for you. Your gifts enable us to keep the vision and mission going here in Toledo and enable us to do daily things that also build our community. And lastly, that link will show you how you can serve. We'd love to have you get involved by serving, and that is such a great way to get to know more people and to serve our community. So go to onehopetoledo.com/info, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great week.